thanks, Thomas, for joining me today. I know that it's been actually crazy. It's been almost a year, or probably just a year right now, since we last spoke and saw each other by Zoom on the training of trainers, which was awesome. And I've been enjoying being a trainer for the Bridging the Gap program. So thank you and welcome. And so, I always like to ask, what kind of coffee, since you're in Seattle, Washington, for those that are watching us here, the home of Starbucks, right? Is that where Starbucks? So not to say that you have to be biased, but what is your preference of coffee? Are you a coffee drinker? Is it decaffeinated, caffeinated, and how do you take your coffee?
Yeah, when I saw this question, I was thinking you're going to run into a tea drinker at one point. I won't be that person. I did drink coffee until I was like 22, 23 is when I started. And I think it was all influenced by when I was living in Europe. So the type of coffee I like to drink, it sometimes kind of makes me sound like a snob, but I like espresso. I don't really like drip coffee. I just like espresso. So the good thing about Seattle is we do have a little place called Starbucks. You might have heard, but there's also a ton of local coffee shops. I think Seattle is one of those coffee cities. So I have a couple local coffee shops that I like to go down to, but I always get the same thing. It's always a double shot with 2 sugars.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. And I will introduce you to everybody. I know there's going to be also on your screen, you'll be seeing who I'm interviewing. It is Tamas Farkas. He is with the CCHCP. Took me a long time to memorize that acronym, but it stands for the Cross-Cultural Healthcare Program. And you are in Seattle, Washington, and you haven't been there forever, actually. So you and I have actually met initially here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm located. And maybe you can share a little bit of that history, but what it's like living in Seattle in comparison to other places you've lived. I know you've also been outside of Colorado as well, and you're multilingual. So that was a lot, but feel free to share what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. I mean, I welcome everyone to read my bio. I have my bio all over the internet now, I feel like, with all these conferences that I'm at.
Yes, you most recently presented at the annual meeting for the National Council of Interpreters in Healthcare, which can be found at ncihc.org, and you also have a bio on the CCHCP website, which is xculture.org. Maybe you can share a little bit how we connected.
Yeah, you and I met when I was living in Denver, and that's where a lot of my family lives. Originally, I was born in Hungary, and then I moved to Colorado because that's where my family was. After that, I went to Switzerland for a while for college, and then I also lived in Puerto Rico. Then I went back to Denver. That's when we met, when I started working at Spring Institute. That's where I started working with interpreters. That's where I started getting into this field. And then after working at Spring for, I think I was there for 4 years, I got an opportunity to come to Seattle, and I've always wanted to live in Seattle. I think I always had this romantic, rainy, the city idea of what it would be like, which of course is always different than the reality. But that's why I was excited to come here, and I liked the opportunity that I had to be part of CCHCP. And as we go through the conversation, you'll see I've become very good at all of the acronyms, because this entire field is just so many acronyms. So once we start talking about some of the other companies, it's just CCC, P, CHC.
Yeah, a lot of tongue twisters for sure. Like I had to practice quite a bit. It does get easier though, to your point. So.
Yeah, you get used to it, but sometimes when me and my coworkers talk to each other, we try to do entire sentences and just acronyms, right? Like AKA.
So when you made the move to Seattle, you mentioned that it was kind of romanticized in your mind. Was it close to what you envisioned? Was it different? And if so, in what way?
Yeah, I don't want to say I expected it to be like the perfect place. I had come here when I took the training of trainers, and that was the first time I'd been to Seattle, and I loved how green it was. I loved the weather. It was always so cool and rainy, and that's what drew me to it. And then when I got here, Summertime here is amazing. It usually doesn't really get much hotter than 90 degrees at max. And there's a lot of lakes, there's a lot of the ocean, so you can go swimming all the time. So I love that. That was my first summer here. And then I got to my first winter, which I didn't realize how far north Seattle was, or that cities this far north experience a lot less sunlight. So in summertime right now, the sun is up till like 10:30, like almost 11. It's still like kind of light out.
Oh, wow.
In the winter time, the sun sets at like 4 o'clock. It's like
Oh,
pitch
boy.
black.
That's
So
a big swing.
exactly. And then on top of it, it's like 4 months of rain. So it's rain and darkness. So I wasn't ready for the rain and darkness and how that seasonal affective disorder actually can affect people. So I think that's
Sure.
something that I wasn't aware of how much that would affect me. I recognize that it probably would, but not how much. And then I think the toughest part that I didn't foresee was the Seattle freeze, so to say. Have you heard about the Seattle freeze?
I have not. Explain it to me.
It's a cultural phenomenon. So I want to make sure as we talk about this, I'm not identifying any individuals. It's just a cultural thing that I read about and to some degree, I would say experienced. But it's this idea that people in Seattle are a little bit colder or take a little bit longer to warm up to you. So that people who come to Seattle kind of experience the Seattle freeze where they have a hard time making friends or connecting with people, and strangers seem kind of distant.
Understood. Yeah.
I don't think every individual is like that. I've met plenty of nice people, but I think in general, in public settings, that's kind of the way people tend to operate.
Yeah. That makes sense. And coming from the East Coast myself, because I'm from Pennsylvania, and then making the transition to Colorado, it was kind of the reverse of that, where in the East Coast, they are, in comparison, a little colder in as far as, being hospitable, or let's say openly, giving salutations and things like that. Where I came to Colorado, kind of accustomed to that, and here, as you know, everyone's kind of like, "Oh, how are you? I like that shirt. I like your tie." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you." That's, I'm not used to that. People are noticing those things. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and again, there's always exceptions. Not to paint a broad brush on any area, but I think it is definitely little microcosms of cultural differences that are particular to different parts of the country. It's just, and I think there is probably a correlation, in my opinion, of the weather and all those conditions that have an effect, whether they're subliminal or recognized. I think that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, there's some interesting articles that talk about the Seattle freeze and what it is and whether it exists or not. But they compare it to kind of Nordic cultures too, where there's also this kind of social distance that's required and respect for silence and things like that.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, now I'm scared when I go back to Denver that I'm not doing things right anymore, because I think, oh, I'm being respectful, I'm giving you your social distance, I'm not talking, I'm respecting silence. But that's the opposite, or not the opposite there, but generally people want to talk to you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking about your time in Puerto Rico a little bit, since my family's from Puerto Rico, I figure I might as well talk a little bit about that. I'm curious of how long you were there. I know we've talked about that in the past, but just for those tuning in, and the culture, it is part of the U.S. A lot of people that I've encountered have always gotten that confused. It is a little confusing that it's a commonwealth, not a state, and then they're not sure where it's located, which is in the Caribbean. But what was your experience there, and what did you like the most about your time on the island?
It was amazing. I always like wherever I travel. I think people have asked me before, what is your favorite place that you've traveled? And I think whatever the current one that I'm at is. But when I went to Puerto Rico, same thing. I had all these idealized ideas of the beach and the music and all of that, which it lived up to its name. There were beaches, there was amazing music. I went there because I wanted to learn more about Latin culture. I wanted to become more fun. I felt like the reserved European, kind of very Seattle freezy, and I wanted to go and be like the warm Spanish speakers that I had met before. And originally my intention was to try to go somewhere in South America. However, with Puerto Rico being part of the United States, it was a lot easier to go there and get a job so that I could stay there for longer. What I didn't realize was the social element that played into it. And I think that was a really important thing that drives me to do this work that I do here. Not just because of my own experiences as an immigrant, but also seeing how people living in the same country cannot have access to the same types of facilities. So I kind of imagined going to the Caribbean would be, oh, just great, everyone's so happy. And what I realized was there was a lot of social distress about the relationship with the United States and about my presence there as a white mainlander, taking jobs that could have been given to Puerto Ricans. And I honestly feel really privileged to have met people who were able to share that viewpoint with me, because I think a lot of people go there on vacation and they see it and they say, oh, this is paradise, it's beautiful. What you don't see is that everyday struggle of the people who live there every day and the opportunities that aren't available to them because they're not exactly part of the United States. So I think that was, I don't want to say the best part, but that was the biggest realization that was the most impactful part for me.
Yeah, very interesting. Oh yeah, and a lot of coffees, obviously drinkers in Puerto Rico, a lot of espresso. I'll share a little bit what I usually drink. I do drink different versions of espresso. Right now, this is actually La Llave. And it's actually one that I believe Cafe Versailles in Miami uses, and that's why we purchased it. We buy it online, and it's in a green container. But my go-to usually is Bustelo. I drink a lot of that.
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Where is that?
There you go.
I mean, this one?
That's it, yeah.
This one actually is from Puerto Rico. This one I brought from Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Yaucono, yeah.
That's the one I drank there.
Yeah, very, very nice. So yeah, and usually one thing that I did live there myself, even though I grew up in Pennsylvania, like I mentioned. My family's from Puerto Rico, so I lived there from 98 to 2000. And I really, one thing I miss is all of the bakeries that are literally almost like in every other block. And you just wake up in the morning and you smell the fresh bread being baked. And very typical to go and get your loaf for the morning or for the day. That little simplicity and just very kind of make you feel part of the community, and with your coffee. And then, I can actually visualize myself there, the smells of everything, and usually there's some type of wood burning because sometimes they cook a lot outside. So whenever I smell wood burning, it reminds me of on the island. So, but yeah, that's very typical, and a lot of good coffee, obviously, that we have in common. So very, very nice. Switching gears a little bit into the CCHCP and what they are doing, and how I've been able to collaborate, obviously now as a trainer of one of the courses that is offered. Maybe you can just share a little bit of what drew you to go from Colorado to Seattle to work for the organization, and a little bit about the history.
Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to smash that bell to stay tuned in and receive notifications.